Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to give it a few minutes to let people slowly roll in, and then we will get things going. Again, just want to say thanks to everyone for joining us today. My name is Carrie Kernan, and I am the Sales Development Director here at TPGI. Just want to go through a few housekeeping items before we get started today. This session is being recorded, and we will email everyone the recording within a few days after the event. We have captions available, so feel free to use them as needed. And lastly, we will have some time for live Q&A at the end. Please use the Q&A box to ask any questions. If for any reason we're unable to get to your question, we run out of time, we will get back to you after the session is over. And lastly, if anyone needs any accessibility support, training, or usability testing, in the email that we send out after the event, there will be a link where you can schedule a time to speak with one of our experts. And with that said, I will let Aaron get started, provide an introduction of himself.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Understand, Test, Solve Keyboard Focus. My name is Aaron Farber. I'm Senior Accessibility Platform Consultant here at TPGI. In this role, I train or support our ARC Empowerment program, which trains organizations to plan and execute in every area of accessibility. And today is really focused on how to use the ARC platform to support your accessibility testing. But you know, for everyone, whether you're using ARC platform or not, you know, I think that it'll all be of benefit to you, and we'll cover just the fundamental principles of keyboard focus. So today is Understand, Test, Solve, and we cover the first fundamental concept of accessibility, keyboard focus. So the learning objectives today are that, for one, we're going to plan for accessibility testing. We'll understand the principles of keyboard accessibility. We'll perform keyboard testing in the context of the ARC platform, and we'll have questions. So, you know, ARC fundamentally is the goal of the ARC platform is to empower teams to address issues one by one while growing their understanding of accessibility over time. With access to the tools and resources within the ARC platform, teams, even with less experience in accessibility, can reliably and So first, with the ARC platform, the ARC Empowerment Program, it's about creating a repeatable, well-defined accessibility testing process. And, you start by having a test plan which maps testing responsibilities to each role involved in delivering online experiences. Accessibility is not the responsibility of a single person or even a single team. It's a mindset which permeates an organization, and ultimately that's how accessibility becomes not only sustainable, but manageable and maintainable. So one of the first steps in creating this, well-defined accessibility testing process is to group related accessibility guidelines. And, we're really focusing on this kind of part of it. There's such a large topic of actually like creating a test plan and breaking down your application into components, selecting a representative sample. It's a very large topic, and I'm happy to talk about it in the Q&A portion, but for the sake of today, we're really just focused on the actual mechanics of testing, and not that part of the planning process. So when you group related accessibility guidelines, and really in formal terms, we mean WCAG success criteria, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It's made up of 50 accessibility guidelines in WCAG 2.1. When you group related accessibility guidelines, it enables testing to be done by the roles with the requisite skill set. So it allows you to kind of delegate testing responsibilities to more people. It also increases efficiency and reduces duplicative work because, when you're doing this one form of testing, you're completing all of the guidelines at once rather than jumping through them kind of in the numerical order. And lastly, when you group the related accessibility guidelines, it leads to full WCAG coverage. And it ensures that, again, like each one is being covered by people with a defined and formalized responsibility for those criteria. So, just to kind of talk before we go further, is that each month starting today at TPGI, we're going to hold a webinar covering one group of these accessibility guidelines. And so it's meant to be very short and kind of digestible. It's a 30-minute presentation followed by 30 minutes of Q&A. And that one, I'm happy to, of course, answer questions, specific to eBoard testing or beyond, or about ARC or anything. And as noted, you can provide questions in the chat, and then also you can, I'm sorry, I'm looking at some of the comments here. People said they can get my sound, but it sounds like it's okay, great. So you can provide questions in the chat, or you can save it to the end, and then I believe you can unmute yourself and ask a question. So so today we're first going to cover keyboard testing. And why is that? It's because it does not require a developer or engineering background to test. It does not require touching code or opening developer tools. I think that for so many organizations out there, especially, sites that are, smaller, that may not have their own development teams, it can seem very overwhelming to just get started and to start working in developer tools. And I think that a lot of developers, like myself, become very, we live in a bubble, right? And we forget just how, small this world is of people that live in developer tools. So keyboard testing is something that can be done by anyone on your team. And and it's a great skill to have and a mindset to have, because it's something that you can always do as sort of a first pass, that when your organization is rolling out, a site, even for something that's kind of like a one-time event, like you're holding a conference, you have that ability to test it yourself. So that's why we're starting here. So when we group the related accessibility guidelines, really there's 6 that kind of come together, and there's more too, but because keyboard focus is the foundation for supporting all assistive technologies. So there's many WCAG success criteria which ultimately connect to keyboard testing, but these are the ones that are kind of most directly related to keyboard testing, and the ones that somebody that does not know code would be able to really understand best. Keyboard 2.11 keyboard. is simply that an action can be completed via keyboard. It does not concern itself with the proper keyboard actions. So, like radio buttons, we use cursor keys, but simply that they are keyboard accessible. If we were to tab onto them, that would actually pass 2.11. Bypass blocks refers to the ability to bypass repeated blocks of content. See some folks here saying, did we lose sound? Oh, well, it's okay. I guess people will, I'll chime in if the hosts let me know about that. Okay. Great. So, yes, bypass blocks allows you to bypass repeated blocks of content. This is, skip links, the ability to skip like navigation bars and things that could have a lot of elements that increases efficiency in keyboard navigation. Next is focus order. We'll really talk about that. And so I'll kind of leave that off for now. And focus visible is simply that when it is critical that when an element is on the page, that it is possible to determine what element is receiving keyboard focus. And non-text contrast, that's a part of focus visible. Okay, thanks. Yes. And 4.12 name role value. That covers, essentially what is the information, the semantics on the page that is conveyed to assistive technologies. And so that's an example of how keyboard testing can indicate that the role of an element is perhaps incorrect. But again, we're kind of looking at today from the perspective of someone that is not a developer, not going to open up developer tools and view, the accessibility information exposed by the browser. Okay, so, the first step for, kind of testing is to understand the tools and resources available to you. So the ARC platform is made up of kind of a family of products. So first, there's ARC monitoring, which is, at the platform's core. It's running a set of automated accessibility rules on your website, your web application, or, key user journeys. And it's connecting, each rule is mapped to specific resources within the platform. So in ARC monitoring, the results are displayed as code. Now, in ARC Toolkit, which is our free Chrome extension, you can scan any page, anything running within your browser. So that allows you to easily scan authenticated pages or, even local file URLs. Or any point in a user journey on your site, for example, after you've opened a dialog. So these go hand in hand, you see, because we can see the code and the resources with ARC platform and then with ARC monitoring, and then we can actually visually inspect the results using ARC Toolkit. So again, anyone can use ARC Toolkit. It's free, it's available on Chrome, but it does not connect with the full set of tools and resources in the ARC platform. So in the ARC platform, before you start keyboard testing, it's helpful to consume role-based trainings to understand the fundamental principles of accessibility. So in ARC, we provide Tutor, which is a set of self-paced training modules for different accessibility trainings, and they're role-based, which is great because I find so many accessibility trainings online. They cover a wide range of topics and stuff that's really beyond the scope of people's knowledge base and their own role. So for keyboard testing, I would recommend consuming the module on accessibility for product owners and project managers. And you see that's an example of, one that's intended for somebody that is not using code. And these modules, they take 15 to 45 minutes. They have built-in quizzes. I think if you were to go through all of these modules, which is, I think, about 10 or 15, be prepared to take the scope of the accessibility certification, which I do have. So myself, the Web Accessibility Specialist certification. Now, there's many accessibility testing tools out there that are using different rules engine, different sets of automated accessibility rules. The first one, but really what separates the ARC platform, which is most notable about the platform, is that it has ARC's knowledge base. And that's your single greatest resource. The ARC knowledge base contains just resources for a really wide range of accessibility scenarios. And I'm going to cover kind of the 3 most important modules here. And where is this at? This is at tpgarc.com. And what's great about ARC is if you're not currently a subscriber to ARC, we do have a free version and you can kind of get a taste. And I'll share this afterwards, and I suppose I could have mentioned this, but all right. So the first resource, and again, I'm just saying that each rule in ARC, accessibility rule, is mapped to specific knowledge-based resources. So first of all, and this facilitates a 3-step process for addressing these issues. And again, that with these 3 clear steps, even people that have less testing experience can reliably carry out accessibility testing. So first, it's understand. That is, understand the significance of an accessibility guideline. So we provide a WCAG reference module which summarizes the accessibility guideline. And you see, I say understand before you really even interact with the code and the element that was actually flagged. And again, this is how we're building our own skills related to accessibility. The next step is to test. With every rule, we provide a step-by-step manual testing procedure. And this allows you to replicate TPGI's own internal testing procedures. So even though it's automated testing and conducting manual testing is really critical to determine the impact on user experience. And ultimately, the impact on the user experience is what determines the issues that we prioritize. So it's not necessarily the number of occurrences, it's the impact on user experience. And then that requires familiarity with the application and where these errors are occurring in user journeys. And again, that can only be determined by manual testing. Then we provide a solve. That's the last step, which is to actually make code changes and to fix these issues. So we provide the accessible web content development module, which provides our battle tested clear steps for implementation. It has code samples, expected behaviors. It allows you to retest and validate the solution. And again, that's ultimately allows you to easily share these resources with your engineers or your vendor that is creating the site, even if you yourself don't know code. So that's a real power of having these resources. And for teams with experienced accessibility subject matter experts, having these resources allows you to stop reinventing the wheel. So first, when we do ARC monitoring, it's going to display all of the issues that it finds across your entire site. And so it covers, I think 30 to 40% of accessibility guidelines. When I say cover, it doesn't mean comprehensively, but it has some tests addressing those success criteria. So here we're looking at the dashboard and the list of issues identified by ARC. Well, our first step is to start grouping these to just find those success criteria related to the 6 ones for keyboard testing that we saw earlier, right? So issue 1 is positive tab index value. Before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about you see we have the keyboard, here's what it looks like, right? Is that we see the rule, positive tab index value. 1 or more elements have a tab index attribute with a value greater than 0. And you think about it, if you are new to accessibility testing, this is not going to make sense to you, right? That's why we start by then looking at the actual knowledge-based resources connected with the rule. And you see here's how it's actually displayed in the platform. So you see we have a resource from each of the 3 modules that we talked about earlier. So, all right, so first, before we, actually even have interacted with these knowledge-based resources, we would go through the training to understand the fundamental principles of keyboard testing. So first of all, let's kind of go through that quickly, is that, keyboard focus, it's the control on the screen that is currently receiving input from the keyboard. People navigate the web, or in other words, control which element has focus by using the tab key. And you press tab to move to the next focusable element, or shift plus tab to move to the previous focusable element. And you see, this is a test that can be done by any person that has a keyboard, right? This doesn't require any license or, testing tool. So again, it's a really easy way for you to just get started with accessibility. Now, key questions, so really, again, like for people on this call, I encourage everyone, with your own site, just tab through the site. And as you're tabbing through the site, here is the questions to have, for yourself as you're navigating through the page. First, is all site function accessible via keyboard? So when you're tabbing through the site, are there elements which do have interactions, like they expand something, or they open a dialogue, or they submit a form? Are all of these activities accessible via keyboard, or must you use a mouse or some other way to interact with them? If not receiving keyboard focus, well, that's an automatic fail for many of these success criteria, and that's a critical issue most likely, right? Next is it possible to skip repeated content like the navigation region? So, we see this very often in many sites, that when you first tab onto the page, it reveals a link to skip to pass the navigation region. Does your site have one? Now, I will say, even if it is a WCAG success criteria, this is use common sense. If your navigation region only has a few links on it or a few focusable elements, it's really not very it's not very time consuming for people to just tab past that. But if you have a navigation region that has 20, 30, 40 elements in it, well, that is quite cumbersome. And it would be nice and it would be efficient to be able to skip it. The next question is the page's focus order logical? Does it follow how one would expect to interact with the page? And we'll talk about that next, because that's kind of a more complex thought. But again, accessibility is about ensuring the same experience for all people. So, when you think about how you read a page, think about that, okay, that's the order in which someone else should read this page. The next question is it always possible to visually determine the element that is currently focused? So when you're tabbing through the site, can you tell what element is in focus? So is the visual indicator easily perceivable? So you may have you may set focus to a button or a link, and it may not, actually show you that it's in focus. Also could be an indication that maybe you have elements that are not visually rendered that are receiving keyboard focus. You have like 1 pixel things that are, that are receiving focus. And the last question is, are there non-interactive elements in the page's focus order? So, if an element cannot be interacted with, it doesn't, most cases, it doesn't need to receive keyboard focus. Now, first, about focus order. Focus order is the order of focusable elements on the page. And, that's determined by the order of elements in the document object model, the DOM, essentially, which is when the web page loads, the browser constructs this tree connecting all the HTML nodes on the page. And, the order of these focusable elements in this tree is kind of colloquially, is referred to as like a page's focus order. Some will call it the tab order. But that's what's largely determining it, is the order of elements in the underlying HTML markup. A correct or logical focus order, it follows the visual order of elements on the page. And, some web pages may have multiple ways that one could visually understand the page, that the site could have, multiple columns. Some people may perceive it as, oh, well, really, we go through each column before moving on to the next column. While someone else could perceive it as, well, there's actually rows, and we kind of actually go left to right, and then we go down to the next row. So, but again, really the fundamental test there is it matching how you as a mouse user interact with the page? So, if you were jumping from top to bottom, well, that's not how you would interact with the page, right? Most people would read it top to bottom. Now there are some ways that the focus order is determined by things beyond the underlying HTML markup. There's tab index attributes. And this is where ARC is very beneficial, because it's scanning your code and it's making you aware of these tab index attributes. Even if, you yourself, are not opening up developer tools. So in ARC Toolkit, the Chrome extension, we provide a tool within that Chrome extension that allows you to visualize a page's focus order. So you see here that the arrows are going across the tpgi.com website, and each focusable element has a number, and the arrows are showing that when you tab through the site, again, the order in which those elements are located on the page. So you see here, looking at the TPGI website, that it's going across the navigation region left to right, then it's moving to kind of the next row of the navigation region. It's not jumping up and down the page. And a great question from someone: who determines the focus order for a new website, or the developer, or both? Well, I think that's something that can be figured, is really, it comes down to how your website is built. If, really the designer, ideally kind of would be displaying, providing some of that information. Of course, if you're using a CMS or a template out of the box, that may not be an ability that you have. So, the developers, the people that have written that code, are really largely determining it. So again, it's really dependent on the underlying code. So let's look at an issue here and kind of how it will, and I'm happy to answer your questions at the end here too. I'm a few minutes over. Apologies, but so first, and just a note to everyone, right? Again, we're gonna, have these presentations are gonna be about 30 minutes, and then we'll have Q&A till the top of the hour. So, and it's all recorded. So if you can't stick around for the remaining 30, it's fine. We'll be providing the recording to you. So first, we have an example of an element here that has a positive tab index attribute. And so, when you have this positive tab index attribute, what's an indication is that when you tab onto the site, that element is going to receive focus, based on the number of its tab index attributes. So if it has a positive tab index attribute of 1, it's going to be the first element on the page. So if we were to go to this site, when we tab onto the page, the first element is not at the start of the page, right? It's down here in this hero section, this call to action button, start your adventure. So, that's an indication that the page's focus order, it's not logical, right? Because we start reading a page from the top down, right? We don't start, kind of in the main section. So again, that's an example of, using that kind of question when you're testing. The next issue here is content behind a dialogue is accessible. So, all right. Well, the content behind the dialogue is not programmatically hidden from assistive technologies. And this is a 1.3.2 meaningful WCAG issue. So you notice meaningful sequence was not a success criteria that we just, that we group with keyboard testing, but this is an example of how when we do keyboard testing, it connects with other success criteria, because again, it's keyboard testing is really the basis for supporting all assistive technologies. So here is a really common example of an issue that I see online. So I feel every website nowadays you're seeing has a cookie consent dialog, a cookie consent banner that often is, requiring you to, accept or reject cookies. Well, think about this again, like, in terms of the questions that we asked at the beginning here. Like, is this focus order logical? Is this how I visually interpret the page? Well, when you interact with a site, right, the first thing that you do, I think for most people, is that you do interact with that cookie consent banner, because for one, the site may require you to, or two, you want more of your browser viewport. You want to be able to see more of the page at once. Now, very often I find that these cookie consent banners, they really should be the first element on the page, right? Like, as we said, for a mouse user, that's the first thing you're interacting with. Therefore, it should be a similar experience for keyboard users. So if you have a site that has a cookie consent banner, that's a test to do yourselves. Right there is to ensure that that is first is the first element receiving focus. Now, these notes are only associated with a single scan. Well, kind of this, what I've been doing right now, right? Like these assertions that I am making about, oh, well, this should be the first elements on the page. Well, in ARC, for each rule, for each instance of an issue, we provide a commentary tab where you can make notes. And this is really for you as you're manually testing to be preserving your insights. You may wish to put like a JIRA ticket link, something like that to delegate that work to someone. So that's the role of the commentary tab here. We kind of went over the rule details, the knowledge-based resources, and so that's where commentary comes into play. Now, after you fix the issue, we kind of are skipping over that part, right? We're not developers in this scenario, right? We're sharing these results with folks and they're going off and fixing them. Well, after they come back and fix them, we're going to go through the manual testing procedure again, and we're going to retest it and validate that fix works. Well, okay, so after we validate that here in ARC, we provide test initiatives where you can track that rule that the issue was for, and you can set a conformance goal for it. And so these notes, they're associated with the entire project. So commentary is associated with single scan, which makes sense, because you're working on that site. And test initiatives are for the lifespan of the project. And we know, accessibility is not terminal. It doesn't have a single delivery date. It's an ongoing process. So here with test initiatives, you can set that information. You can set those conformance goals. And that's really the last step in kind of closing the loop on fixing an issue. And that concludes today. So just very quickly going through that. And again, as you're using ARC, as you're using ARC Toolkit, you'll go through these issues and you'll be learning over time and getting, again, understanding the nuances of these things. And another benefit of the ARC, which I haven't shown here kind of for the sake of time, but we have also provide a help desk for the issues related to keyboard testing that are so custom or nuanced that they don't fit into your skill set. So you may have things that have that are really complex interactions that, again, are not a simple button or a link. People have, sites now that even have AR, VR within the browser, right? So for those kind of things, it's where the help desk is great because you can get access to an accessibility expert on demand. So, all right, let's look at some of the questions here. So would accessibility tickets be considered as bugs or user stories? I assume you mean in terms of your own organization. And to me, those things, a bug and a user story, I feel like we use those terms. They kind of mean different things to different people. These are bugs. These are fundamental errors. If someone could complete an action on your site using the keyboard, that is a bug. Now, some people frame a bug in terms of a user story, like the person that would be affected by this issue. So user stories, to me, they can cover both bugs and feature requests. It's not a feature request. Accessibility is not a feature request. So yeah, these are bugs. But again, I do think that framing things as user stories does make it more compelling. All right, let's see this next question. If my design and development team is in Switzerland, would they be able to communicate with an ARC per team person in real time? Yes. I mean, they must, reach out and schedule it, and, the great benefit of the TP, the ARC help desk is that, that we will provide a response generally within 24 hours. So it's designed to kind of fit within those developer sprints. And again, that's, we exert a lot of effort on our side to triage those tickets and ensure that they are routed to the correct person. Because the issues cover such a wide range of topics, right? From, PDF accessibility to a particular API. Yes, we'll absolutely can schedule things and talk to people in real time. That's personally what my favorite approach to things. I'm a big believer in paired programming of, two developers sharing a screen. and working through issues. And that's definitely something you can do with the help desk. And, the help desk is a resource that is your time. So, you are, determining how you want to use it, So, and of all the things I do at TPGI, answering help desk questions is my absolute favorite. Any other questions about if information on the screen is presented in column, but when we tab, it's horizontal? Is it a fail of keyboard order? Well, again, it depends on that's a great question. That's kind of what I was drawing at earlier, right? Is we think about I'm going to pull up the ARC to kind of show an example, because that's such a great question. So here we're looking at one of the slides from our deck here of here's the ARC platform, and you see. So here, the question was, if information on the screen is presented in column, but when we tab, it's horizontal, is it a fail of keyboard order? Well, to me, again, that comes down to how you visually perceive the page. So it doesn't, there's not, for some sites, if it clearly is like, let's say what would be something that's in columns, maybe like a table of like resources, right? Well, if you're moving horizontally and you're jumping from one like item to the next, when really you should be going through all the, like, let's say you have, I guess what would be a better example of like, let's say you have like a set of like each column is like a clothing item. And for each clothing item, you have like different colors and sizes and those kinds of things. Well, if you're jumping across the columns here, right, from like one item to the next, obviously like that's not logically how you interpret the page, right? Really, you go through all of the stuff for one item and then you move to all the stuff through the next item. So then therefore that is an issue. But if it is something where there's multiple ways to potentially understand how the page is organized, that's not a fail of keyboard order. And that's why I brought up this page here. Because so if I were to tab onto this site, and let's say we can see here that we're moving through the navigation bar and we're moving through I'm pressing the tab key, and I'm moving through the side navigation here. Well, let's say instead of going through the side navigation, maybe after we cross this profile avatar icon, we instead went to this breadcrumb list. That may not be an error, right? Because that may be how we kind of understand the page. Now in practice, I think it probably would be here, right? Because this is like navigation, and that tends to be the first thing on the page. But again, it really comes down to the context of the page. And to me, if it's plausible that there are multiple ways to perceive the content, it's not an error. I think that, we're really looking for things that are clear failures of accessibility guidelines. And if something is kind of debatable, right? Like, well, is it, I mean, again, like these are questions for yourself, like as you're going through the site, like as a mouse user, is this kind of matching how I perceive the page, right? So, and also, is it preventing me from accessing the page in a logical manner, right? So, is there any instances where having a positive tab index would be okay, or done intentionally for a certain purpose? I don't really think so myself, actually, because the thing is that when we set a positive tab index attribute, we're separate, as we said, with focus order, that's determined by the order of elements on the page. So or I mean, the focus order is determined by the order of elements in the underlying HTML. So when you use the positive tab index attribute, you're overriding the order of the elements in the underlying HTML to say explicitly it should be in this order. But what happens when you do that, right, is we start separating, we're decoupling the experience of keyboard users and assistive technology users, right? Because a screen reader user, they're really just reading down through the HTML. They're moving through it just in the, in a linear order through it. So generally, if you're providing a positive tab index attribute, you're kind of correcting you're overriding really an incorrect order in that underlying HTML. So a problem still exists for screen reader users, for other assistive technology users. So that's why really the answer is you have to address the order of elements in the underlying HTML. When you do the positive tab index attribute, you just create other WCAG failures, or you don't address other WCAG failures. So you appreciate kind of that point here is that okay, that's exactly the word. That's a perfect word. It's a hack. It's a hack that shouldn't be used. It's great. Now the next question I see here is, depends on the requirements of the projects. You can request keyboard focus if the element order is not in the order of requirements. When you say you can request keyboard focus, I assume you mean from your designers. Well, yeah, I agree with you. I think that's a great way to kind of ensure accessibility in your projects is you can ask designers like, hey, can you add accessibility information in your mock-ups of my site? You can send them resources within ARC or elsewhere online about how to demonstrate focus order in their mock-ups. And so then that can become like a project requirement. And, there's a lot of simple steps that you can do during the contracting process for building a website that can kind of give you more accessibility. So, I've seen a lot of small businesses when they're not that familiar, some of them, with accessibility testing, but they have discovered some of the automated testing tools in browser. The Google Chrome browser has a built-in accessibility testing tool for automated testing. And so they would require web development firms that were building for them, just like, hey, I want 0 errors over the automated testing tool. So even though they did not themselves really understand the underlying principles of of those errors, they were able to make that a requirement to the development firm. And so they gave them a lot of more accessibility probably out of the box. Now we have a question here about the F-shaped reading pattern. I'm not familiar with this. So, but it looks like it's from the Norman Nielsen group. We'll see if it opens. But I have another question here is, can you speak to the issue of focus trapping and modals? Of course, yeah. So as an example, let's go to, so again, dialogues are pop-ups of information where the site is, in most cases, a dialogue it's a pop-up of information. And dialogues can be modal or non-modal. So a modal dialogue is that a site is requiring you to interact with an element before returning to main page content under that dialogue. A non-modal dialogue is something where you are able to navigate to and from the main page content. So, we think about like a chat box. To me, that's a non-modal dialogue, because very often people are in the chat and they're working on stuff, and then they want to be able, they navigate to the main content area to do something in the chat. A modal dialogue is something where, again, you are required to interact with that dialogue before you can interact with the rest of the page. So, an example of that is, confirming a transaction, or, completing an age gate, like, are you 21 before you access this website, right? Like, you are not able to, or not supposed to be able to interact with content until you've interacted with that modal. So dialogues are a very elaborate user interaction pattern. So that's really what's so beneficial about ARC. So let's look at an example of like the resource for dialogues. And that's kind of like why I'm showing this, right? It's like, it just shows like we can't really answer all the questions in this time. And it's about instead having understanding of the resources available to you, so that, again, you can, go about this yourselves. So, okay, like this question about dialogues, let's go to the website accessible web content development module. See here, we have a very just wide range of front-end development topics, but we have one here, a section on widgets for different commonly used user interface elements. And what's great about this resource here, this module, I feel like, is that you can use it to help solve accessibility issues, but you can also use it on like a preemptive level. That like, hey, I know we want to build a dialogue. Before we build it, like, let's look at the requirements and expected behaviors for dialogues. So, okay, we'll pull up dialogue. You see here. So, yes, it's a common. Let's see what it says. So the question was the issue of focus trapping and modals. So for modal dialogues, here's an example that we display here. Again, it's really a confirmation dialogue. The dialogue's title says empty the recycling bin. These items will be permanently deleted and cannot be recovered. Are you sure? So obviously, like, that's an example saying like we have to interact with before we do anything else on the page. Okay. So I'm going to scroll down the page and let's see. Here we have information about focus management for modal dialogues. So, okay, so the first step for a modal dialogue is that when the dialogue is launched, focus must be moved to the dialogue, which again, this matches the mouse user experience, that when dialogue appears, we are immediately interacting with it. Like the navigation is seamless to the dialogue. It should be similar for keyboard, right? So now, while the dialogue is visible, we can tell what elements are focused. So when we set focus to the dialogue, that should be visually apparent that the person is within the dialogue. And while we're tabbing through the dialogue, we have to maintain focus. Now, and then, while the dialogue is open, and I know we have a section about that here, see, while the dialogue, is visible, is that while the dialogue is visible, focus should be contained within the dialogue. And that is, again, because the person is not supposed to interact with the rest of the web content until they have completed the action within the dialogue. And in fact, right, like there could be situations where it's very serious if a person can tab outside of the dialogue. They could be interacting with, paywalled content or other, it could be like a page that's authenticated or something, or that has an age gate. And, essentially the person is viewing content or interacting with content that is again, meant to be inaccessible and not available at that time. So we constrain keyboard focus within the dialogue. We keep the keyboard focus in there. So when you're tabbing through the dialogue, focus should just remain within it. And so now, and then the last thing here is that after you close the dialogue, focus should return to the element which triggered the dialogue to appear. So we see these are all like fundamental requirements of a modal dialogue. If we were in communication with our team, we could share this resource and just state that these are going to be requirements for our implementation. And we know what to test and look for. These are not things, and even though we have these code samples and all of these things on this in this resource, really, these are tests that can be done without interacting with the code yourselves. That covers, I think, that question about focus within dialogues. Now, one more question I think we have time for here. If a calendar widget is not accessible through the keyboard, is it a failure of keyboard order? Well, to me, it's an interesting question, because it depends what the calendar widget does. My own belief here is that, let's say you have a date picker, like you have to enter a date. Very commonly, I will see that the date picker is not keyboard accessible. And that is something that a lot of teams will really struggle to fix, because very few people build a date picker out or a calendar out of the box, themselves. It's a very complex element. Well, if there's no other way to provide a date, that's absolutely a failure of keyboard order, of keyboard accessibility, But if someone can type in the date, I think that personally, it's an interesting question for WCAG experts. But if you can do the same functionality simply by typing it in, is it a failure of keyboard accessibility? Because you are providing the same functionality to the person. So, but personally, I don't get into those questions very much, because, typically date picker has default date of today's date focus. No, there's no standardized pattern for date pickers. It really depends on how every site does it differently. There may be an HTML element now that does it, but again, they're all so different. We can't just say that it has that pattern. But anyways, back to the original point here of if let's say your date picker is inaccessible, but you can type in the date, is that an accessibility error? Well, I don't get into that question, as I said, because when a site receives a accessibility complaint or even litigation, that's not because of a WCAG violation. Maybe in a superficial sense, but no, it's because someone cannot access the site. Someone cannot complete a key user site task. So if someone can type in the date, that their access is not limited. Maybe it's inconvenient, or it'd be better if they could do it multiple ways. But again, it really comes down to that accessibility mindset. Like, am I ensuring the same experience to people? And I wouldn't concern myself so much with this Talmudic questions of what is WCAG, All right. So we're at the end of the hour now. It's great questions, everyone. I really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to doing it each month, and we're going to get, more accustomed to them. And I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Thanks, Aaron. If you had any questions and we didn't get to you, feel free to reach out at ida@tpgi.com, and we will get back to you with any answers. And look forward to seeing you guys again on the next one.